Have you ever met someone so obsessed with control that they'd call the police over a set of keys? Well, buckle up, because this story about an HOA president's power trip might just be the craziest thing you'll hear today. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because trust me, you won't want to miss how this ends. The California sun was setting behind the pristine houses of Oakwood Gates Community as I pulled my moving truck through. The elaborate entrance, the security guard gave me a friendly nod, checking my temporary access code before letting me pass. As a software security specialist, I appreciated good access control. It was literally my job to keep digital systems secure. Little did I know that these very gates would become the center of an absolutely insane conflict that would turn my peaceful new home into a suburban battlefield. I'd spent the last decade working remotely, designing security systems for major tech companies. The success of my latest project had finally allowed me to upgrade from my cramped apartment to this beautiful house in what seemed like a perfect gated community. The listing had advertised quiet streets, friendly neighbors, and top-notch security. Well, 2 out of 3 wasn't bad. My first week was surprisingly peaceful. I'd been methodically setting up my home office, arranging my workspace to face the large bay windows that overlooked a meticulously maintained community park. The previous owners had left the place in immaculate condition, and I was just starting to feel settled in. It was a Wednesday afternoon when everything changed. I was in the middle of a video call with a client when my doorbell rang. Not the normal ding-dong. This was more like someone trying to Morse code an SOS through my door chime. I quickly wrapped up my call and headed downstairs, where the aggressive chiming continued without pause. Opening the door, I found myself face to face with a woman who looked like she'd just stepped out of a real estate magazine. Perfect blonde bob, designer sunglasses perched on her head, and an expression that suggested she'd just smelled something unpleasant. Behind her stood a tall man in golf attire, looking decidedly uncomfortable. "You must be the new resident," she said, not as a greeting but as an accusation. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Patricia Reynolds, president of the Oakwood Gates Homeowners Association. This is my husband, Derek." She gestured vaguely toward the man behind her, who managed a weak wave. "Mark Thompson," I replied, maintaining my professional video call smile. "Nice to meet you." "We need your gate keys," Patricia announced without preamble, holding out her manicured hand expectantly. I blinked, wondering if I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Patricia's smile tightened. "Your gate keys. All residents must surrender their physical gate keys to the HOA for security purposes. It's in the guidelines." Now, as someone who literally worked in security for a living, this request set off every red flag in my mind. "I wasn't aware of any such requirement," I said carefully, "and I haven't received any guidelines yet." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Well, I'm telling you now. We maintain a central key repository for emergency access. It's mandatory." I leaned against my door frame, studying her face. "That's interesting, because I just had a complete security briefing with the gate company yesterday. They didn't mention anything about surrendering keys to the HOA. The gate company works for us," Patricia snapped, her friendly facade cracking slightly. "And as HOA president, I'm telling you that you need to hand over those keys immediately." Derek shifted uncomfortably behind her. "Patty, maybe we should—" "Not now, Derek." She cut him off without looking back. Her eyes were fixed on me, hand still extended. "The keys, Mr. Thompson, now." I straightened up, crossing my arms. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Mrs. Reynolds. First, I'd need to see the official HOA documentation requiring key surrender. Second, as a security professional myself, I can tell you that maintaining a central repository of physical keys is actually a massive security risk. And third," I smiled, "I don't actually have any physical keys." My access is all digital. Patricia's hand dropped to her side. Excuse me. The gate company upgraded to a fully digital system last month, I explained. Each resident has a unique access code and app-based entry. Physical keys aren't even compatible with the new system anymore. The color drained from Patricia's face, replaced quickly by an angry flush. That's impossible. I wasn't consulted about any system upgrade. According to James at the security company, the upgrade was approved by the HOA board 3 months ago, I said, watching her reaction carefully. There should be records of the vote. Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice. Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice. This is unacceptable, she hissed. You're new here, Mr. Thompson. You don't understand how things work in Oakwood Gates. We have procedures, traditions. Honey, Derek tried again, placing a hand on her shoulder. Maybe we should discuss this at the next board meeting. Patricia shrugged off his hand. I'm not leaving without those keys. I sighed, realizing this conversation was going nowhere productive. Mrs. Reynolds, I've explained that I don't have any physical keys to give you. The system is digital now. If you have concerns about the security upgrade, I suggest you take it up with the gate company or the HOA board. Oh, I will, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. And you'll learn that in this community, we follow the rules. My rules. With that, she spun on her heel and stormed off, leaving Derek standing awkwardly on my porch. He gave me an apologetic look. She's usually not like this, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Welcome to the neighborhood. He hurried after his wife, who was already halfway down my driveway, furiously tapping at her phone. I watched them go, already dreading whatever was coming next. In my experience, people like Patricia Reynolds didn't take well to being told no. As I closed my door, I heard her voice carry across the perfectly manicured lawn. This isn't over. I couldn't help but chuckle. If she thought she could intimidate a cybersecurity expert with her demands for obsolete keys, she had another thing coming. Still, as I returned to my home office, I made a mental note to check my security cameras and save the footage of our interaction. Something told me this was just the beginning of what would become a very interesting neighborhood saga. The next morning dawned with an eerie silence over Oakwood Gates Community. I had expected some immediate retaliation from Patricia Reynolds after our confrontation about the gate keys, but the quiet felt more ominous than peaceful. As I made my morning coffee, enjoying the view of early joggers passing by my kitchen window, my phone buzzed with an incoming email. Subject: urgent. Security protocol violation. Immediate action required from P. Reynolds, Oakwood Gates HOA. The message was typed entirely in bold red text, complete with multiple exclamation points, a sure sign of someone who thought caps lock added legal weight to their words. I couldn't help but smirk as I began reading, Dear Mr. Thompson, this notice serves as an official warning regarding your refusal to comply with established community security protocols. Your failure to surrender gate access devices to the HOA board constitutes a severe violation of community guidelines. As per Section 7, 3 of the HOA bylaws, which you clearly haven't read, all residents must provide backup access methods to the board. You have 24 hours to comply with this requirement or face the following consequences: immediate fines of $500 per day, suspension of all community privileges, potential legal action for endangering community safety, report to local authorities for suspicious behavior. Please deliver all gate access devices to my residence at 1542 Oakwood Circle before 9 a.m. tomorrow. Regards, Patricia Reynolds, President, Oakwood Gates HOA. I took another sip of coffee, forwarding the email to my personal account for safekeeping. As someone who had spent years dealing with actual security threats, Patricia's attempts at intimidation were almost amusing. Almost. Opening my laptop, I pulled up the official HOA documentation I'd received during my home purchase. As I suspected, there was no Section 7.3 nor any requirement about surrendering access devices. In fact, the only mention of gate security referenced the new digital system explicitly. Just as I was about to compose a response, my doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't Patricia's impatient staccato, but a gentle, almost apologetic chime. Through my security camera, I could see Linda Chen, my next-door neighbor, shifting nervously on my porch. "Good morning," I said, opening the door. Linda was a retired teacher who had already brought over welcome cookies my first week here. She had a kind face that currently looked troubled. "Mark, I'm so sorry to bother you," she began, wringing her hands, "but I felt I should warn you. Patricia just called an emergency HOA meeting for this afternoon. She's telling everyone you're a security risk to the community." I raised an eyebrow. "Because I won't give her keys that don't exist." Linda nodded, lowering her voice. "She's claiming you must have duplicate keys you're hiding, that you could be making copies for anyone. She's even suggesting you might be working with outside criminals." She paused, looking embarrassed.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"I know it's ridiculous, but Patricia has a way of making people believe things." "I appreciate the heads up, Linda," I said, pulling out my phone. "Would you mind telling me more about how Patricia usually handles these situations?" Over the next hour, Linda painted a picture that made my security analyst brain work overtime. Apparently, Patricia had a history of using imaginary rule violations to harass residents who challenged her authority. Her favorite tactics included calling emergency meetings, spreading rumors, and threatening legal action she had no power to take. Last year, she tried to fine the Fosters $1,000 because their rose bushes were the wrong shade of pink, Linda explained. When they refused to pay, she started telling everyone they were running an illegal business from their garage. It got so bad they nearly moved. I took notes as Linda spoke, a plan already forming in my mind. "And the actual HOA board, what do they say about all this?" Linda sighed. "Most of them are too afraid to stand up to her. She's been president for 8 years because nobody dares to run against her. The few who tried..." She trailed off, shaking her head. After Linda left, I spent the next few hours preparing. First, I called James Wilson at the security company, confirming what I already knew. The physical key system had been completely removed during the digital upgrade. Then I reached out to Mike Anderson, one of the HOA board members Linda had mentioned as being less under Patricia's influence. "Oh God, the key thing again," Mike groaned when I explained the situation. "Look, we voted for the digital upgrade, specifically because Patricia was demanding copies of everyone's keys. It was a liability nightmare waiting to happen." "So she has no actual authority to demand access devices?" I asked, recording our conversation with his permission. "None whatsoever," Mike confirmed. "The board explicitly prohibited the practice in the new bylaws, but Patricia, she has a hard time letting go of control." By the time 3 p.m. rolled around, I was ready for the emergency meeting. I arrived at the community center early, setting up my laptop and a small projector I used for client presentations. Other residents filtered in, many giving me curious or suspicious looks. Patricia sat at the front, surrounded by her usual supporters, practically vibrating with righteous indignation. "Members of Oakwood Gates," she began once everyone was seated, her voice dripping with concern. "I've called this emergency meeting to address a serious security breach in our community. Our newest resident," She pointed at me dramatically. Has refused to comply with critical safety protocols, potentially putting all of our homes and families at risk. I watched as she wove her tale, transforming my simple refusal into an elaborate conspiracy. According to Patricia, I was probably making copies of keys to sell to criminals, using my tech background as a cover for nefarious activities. She even suggested that my home office setup might be a hacking center. When she finally paused for breath, I stood up, connecting my laptop to the projector. Mrs. Reynolds, before you continue, I'd like to share some information with the community. Patricia's eyes narrowed. This is not your meeting, Mr. Thompson. Sit down. Actually, I said, pulling up my first slide, as a homeowner in good standing, I have the right to speak at any community meeting. It's in the bylaws, the real ones, not the imaginary Section 7(3) you quoted in your email. A murmur went through the crowd. I clicked to my next slide, showing the official documentation of the gate system upgrade, complete with board signatures, including Patricia's own. 3 months ago, this community voted to spend $50,000 on a state-of-the-art digital access system. The old key-based system was completely removed. There are no physical keys to surrender, and no HOA official has the right to demand resident access devices. Patricia jumped to her feet. That's not, Here's the vote record, I continued, switching slides. And here's the security company's confirmation that all physical locks were replaced. And here, I clicked again, is Mrs. Reynolds' own email from 2 months ago approving the final removal of the key system. The room had gone very quiet. Patricia's face had turned an interesting shade of red. You're twisting things, she sputtered. This is about community safety. Is it? I asked, pulling up my next slide. Like when you threatened the Fosters over their rose bushes, or when you tried to fine the Patels for having a bird feeder, or maybe like when you demanded garage door codes from the Wilsons. With each example, I showed documentation, emails, letters, photos, all provided by Linda and other neighbors who'd finally had enough. Patricia's face went from red to white as she realized how thoroughly I'd prepared. This is slander, she shrieked. I'll sue you for defamation. I smiled calmly. Everything I'm showing is documented fact, Mrs. Reynolds, but please feel free to explain to everyone why you need access codes and keys that don't exist for a system that you personally approved replacing. The room erupted in conversation. I could see the moment Patricia realized she was losing control, her carefully cultivated image of authority crumbling as residents began openly questioning her other rules. Mike Anderson stood up. I move that we table any discussion of key surrender and instead open an investigation into Mrs. Reynolds' use of her position to harass residents. Seconded, called out Greg Foster, his wife Emily nodding firmly beside him. Patricia looked around wildly, but even her usual supporters were avoiding her eyes. This isn't, you can't. She grabbed her designer purse and stormed toward the door, pausing only to jab a finger in my direction. This isn't over, Mr. Thompson. You have no idea what you've started. As the door slammed behind her, Linda caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle thumbs up. The remaining residents gathered around my laptop, eager to share their own stories of Patricia's overreach. Walking home that evening, I couldn't help but feel satisfied, but I knew better than to think this was truly over. People like Patricia Reynolds didn't give up power easily, and I had just very publicly challenged her authority. As if to confirm my thoughts, I spotted her standing in her front yard, talking intensely on her phone and glaring in my direction. I gave her a friendly wave as I passed, which only made her turn away sharply. Through my security expertise, I'd won this round, but something told me Patricia was already planning her next move. The question was, how far would she go to maintain her illusion of control? That night, as I reviewed my security footage out of professional habit, I noticed Patricia's husband, Derek, making several trips to their garage, loading something into their SUV. I zoomed in, enhanced the image, and felt my stomach tighten. Through the grainy night vision, I could just make out what looked like old lockboxes and stacks of papers. It seemed Patricia was preparing for war, and I had a feeling those papers might reveal just how deep her manipulation of the community really went. I backed up my security footage to a secure cloud server and set my systems to high alert. Whatever Patricia was planning, I would be ready. Little did I know, her next move would make our gate key dispute look like a friendly disagreement, and it would force me to use every skill in my security arsenal to protect not just myself, but the entire community from her desperate grasp for control. The morning after the explosive HOA meeting, I woke up to a symphony of notification sounds from my phone. My inbox was flooded with dozens of identical emails, each bearing the same ominous subject line: violation notice, immediate action required. It seemed Patricia Reynolds had spent her night productively, though not in any way that could be considered reasonable. Opening the first email, I found myself looking at a meticulously detailed list of alleged violations, each more absurd than the last. According to Patricia's late-night documentation, my house was in violation of no fewer than 37 different HOA regulations, most of which seemed to have been invented on the spot. Unauthorized security camera positioning, read one violation. Security devices must be approved by HOA president personally. Another claimed my front door's paint shade was exactly 2.3% darker than approved community standards. There was even a citation for suspicious late-night computer activity visible through windows, which I had to admire for its creative paranoia. But the most interesting violation came at the bottom of the list: illegal possession and distribution of classified community security information. The fine for this particular infraction, $10,000 per day, retroactive to my move-in date. I was sipping my morning coffee, calculating the hilariously illegal total Patricia thought I owed, when my security system alerted me to movement at my front door. Through the camera feed, I watched as Patricia herself marched up my driveway, accompanied by a man I didn't recognize. He wore an ill-fitting suit and carried a briefcase that had seen better days. My doorbell chimed, not Patricia's usual aggressive stabbing, but a professional-sounding double tap. I opened the door to find Patricia wearing what she clearly thought was an expression of solemn authority. "Mr. Thompson," she announced, "this is Mr. Gerald Waters, my personal attorney. He's here to serve you with official notice of your violations and impending legal action." I looked at the supposed attorney, noting his nervous sweat and the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "Before we proceed, Mr. Waters, I'd like to confirm your bar number for my records." The man's eyes widened slightly. Patricia cut in quickly. "That won't be necessary. Mr. Waters represents the HOA's interests. And actually," I interrupted, "as a resident potentially facing legal action, I have every right to verify the credentials of any attorney claiming to represent the HOA. So, Mr. Waters, your bar number?" He glanced at Patricia, who was turning an interesting shade of purple. "That is, I'm not exactly an attorney," I suggested helpfully, "because that would be practicing law without a license, which is a criminal offense in this state. I'm sure Mrs. Reynolds wouldn't knowingly participate in something illegal, would she?" "Jerry is a legal consultant," Patricia snapped, but I could see the fear flickering behind her eyes. "He's here to advise on the validity of fabricated violations and fraudulent fines." I pulled out my phone, showing them the emails. "Let's discuss those, shall we? Starting with this fascinating calculation of my front door's paint variation. I'd love to know what scientific instrument you used for that measurement, Mrs. Reynolds." Gerald was already backing away, clutching his briefcase like a shield. "Mrs. Reynolds, I don't think—" "Don't you dare!" Patricia hissed at him, but he was already halfway down my driveway. We watched as he practically sprinted to his car, peeling out of the neighborhood with impressive speed for such an old sedan. Patricia turned back to me, her composed mask cracking. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Using your tech knowledge to undermine me, turning the community against their president. I haven't undermined anything, Mrs. Reynolds. You're doing that quite effectively on your own. First with impossible demands for non-existent keys, and now with fraudulent legal threats. I have to ask, what's your end game here?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "My end game. I've spent 8 years building this community, maintaining standards, keeping the right kind of people in and the wrong kind out. Then you show up with your fancy security systems and digital codes, dismantling everything I've worked for. You mean your ability to access everyone's homes whenever you want?" I suggested mildly. "Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? Control." Patricia's face contorted. "You have no idea what's coming, Mr. Thompson. I've dealt with troublemakers before. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd never heard of Oakwood Gates." As she stormed off, I noticed movement behind the curtains of several neighboring houses. Our conversation had drawn an audience, and Patricia's mask had slipped at exactly the wrong moment. I wondered how many others had heard her rather revealing outburst. I spent the next few hours documenting everything: the fraudulent violations, the fake attorney, Patricia's threats. I was just finishing up when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Mike Anderson, HOA board. "Mark!" Mike's voice was tense. "We've got a situation. Patricia just called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. She's claiming to have evidence that you hacked the gate system and sold access codes to outside parties." I sat back in my chair, impressed, despite myself. That's quite an escalation from demanding physical keys that don't exist. "She's got screenshots, Mark. Security logs showing multiple unauthorized access attempts from your IP address. She's talking about calling the police." I smiled, feeling a familiar rush of anticipation. This was my territory now. "Tell me, Mike, did Patricia ever mention why she was so invested in maintaining the old key system?" "Not really. Just that it was tradition, that she needed emergency access for community safety." "Why?" "Because I think it's time we looked a little closer at how our former president has been using her access privileges." "When's the meeting?" 3 o'clock at the community center. "Mark, be careful. Patricia's desperate, and desperate people do desperate things," I finished. "Don't worry, Mike, I'll be ready." After hanging up, I pulled up my own security logs. For the past week, I'd been monitoring all traffic to and from the gate system, standard procedure for any security audit. What I found was fascinating. Multiple unauthorized access attempts, all right before the system upgrade, all from an IP address registered to 1542 Oakwood Circle, Patricia's house. I dug deeper, following digital breadcrumbs through layers of data. What emerged was a pattern that would have impressed any cybercriminal. For years, Patricia had been using her position to maintain a shadow system of access to every home in the community. The physical keys were just the start. She had garage codes, alarm passwords, even copies of residents' private gate fobs. But the new digital system had changed everything. With individually coded access and detailed logs of every entry, her ability to move freely through the community was gone. No wonder she was desperate to maintain control of the old system. At exactly 2:55 p.m., I walked into the community center carrying a single USB drive. Patricia was already there, surrounded by printouts and looking triumphant. Most of the board members sat around the conference table, expressions ranging from concerned to skeptical. "Now that everyone's here," Patricia began, not waiting for The official start time. I have proof of Mr. Thompson's criminal activities. These logs show multiple unauthorized access attempts to our security system, all traced back to his home network. She began passing out papers, screenshots showing what appeared to be failed login attempts from my IP address. I had to admit, they looked convincing. Furthermore, she continued, I've discovered evidence that Mr. Thompson has been selling access codes to outside parties. Just yesterday, there were over 20 unique device connections to our gate system from unknown sources. The board members murmured, examining the evidence. Patricia shot me a smug look. Given the severity of these security breaches, I move that we immediately revoke Mr. Thompson's access privileges and proceed with legal action. Interesting approach, I said quietly, plugging my USB drive into the room's projection system. But before we vote on that, I think everyone should see the complete security logs, not just the carefully selected screenshots Mrs. Reynolds provided. Patricia's smile faltered. That won't be necessary. The evidence is clear. Oh, I agree completely, I said, pulling up my first display. The evidence is very clear. For example, these logs show that the unauthorized access attempts from my IP address were actually spoofed, a basic hacking technique that makes traffic appear to come from somewhere else. And look at the origin point of those spoofed attempts. The room went silent as Patricia's own IP address appeared on screen. But that's just the beginning, I continued, clicking through my presentation. I've been conducting a security audit of our systems. It's literally my job, after all. Would anyone like to guess how many times Mrs. Reynolds attempted to access the old key database after it was officially decommissioned? Patricia's face had gone pale. You can't prove 217 attempts in the past month alone, I announced, along with multiple efforts to override the new digital locks. But the really interesting part is what I found when I traced her access history back through the old system. You can't do this, Patricia whispered. Years of unauthorized entry logs, I continued. Times and dates when our HOA president used her collected keys and codes to enter residents' homes without permission or documentation. Quite a few of these entries correspond with mysterious property damage reports and subsequent fines. Fascinating correlation, wouldn't you say? The board members were staring at Patricia now, who had begun gathering her papers with shaking hands. This is all lies, she declared. He's manipulated these logs to discredit me. I demand a full investigation, I suggested. I agree completely. In fact, I've already prepared a detailed report for the county prosecutor's office. Breaking and entering fraud, cybercrimes, they seemed very interested. Patricia knocked over her chair as she stood. You have no right. This community needs me. I keep everyone safe. Safe? Mike Anderson stood up. By breaking into our homes, by using our private information to control us, Patricia, the only threat to this community's safety has been you. She looked around wildly, but found no support in the faces of her former allies. Without another word, she grabbed her belongings and fled the room. The silence that followed was broken by Greg Foster's low whistle. Well, he said, I guess we need a new HOA president. I spent the next few hours answering questions from board members and residents, explaining the technical details of Patricia's schemes. By evening, a notice had been posted throughout the community announcing an emergency election to replace her. Walking home, I spotted Derek Reynolds loading boxes into their car. He saw me and walked over, looking tired, but relieved. She's staying with her sister for a while, he said quietly. Says she needs time to think. I wanted to thank you. I've spent years watching her obsession with control destroy our lives. Maybe now. I nodded, understanding. Sometimes people need to lose everything before they can see what they've become. As I watched Derek drive away, my phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Thank you for giving us our community back, I smiled, looking around at the peaceful streets of Oakwood Gates. The digital gate system blinked its reassuring green light, secure and transparent, just as it should be. Sometimes the best security isn't about keeping people out, but about protecting them from those who abuse their trust from within. That night, as I reviewed my security feeds one last time, I noticed Patricia's account attempting one final login to the gate system. Access denied. Some doors, once closed, stay that way for good. The morning sun cast long shadows across Oakwood. Gates's residents gathered for what should have been a routine community meeting. Instead, tension filled the air like static before a storm. Patricia Reynolds might have left the neighborhood temporarily, but her influence lingered like a ghost, especially among her most devoted supporters. I sat in my usual spot near the back of the community center, laptop open and security systems running their usual diagnostics. The past few days had been quietly unsettling. No direct confrontations, but plenty of whispered conversations that stopped when I walked by, and more than a few suspicious glances from Patricia's old guard. Mike Anderson called the meeting to order, his voice carrying a note of forced cheerfulness. Before we begin today's agenda, I want to address some concerns that have been raised about our recent security system changes. A hand shot up immediately. Barbara Mitchell, Patricia's former vice president and longtime friend, stood without waiting to be acknowledged. Yes, concerns is putting it mildly. Since Mr. Thompson arrived and interfered with our established security protocols, there have been 3 suspicious vehicles spotted in the neighborhood. I kept my expression neutral, but my fingers were already pulling up the gate access logs. As I suspected, there had been exactly 0 unauthorized entries. The suspicious vehicles were probably food delivery drivers or visiting relatives. Furthermore, Barbara continued, her voice rising, I've received dozens of complaints about privacy violations. Mr. Thompson's security cameras are recording everything we do. That got my attention. My home security system was strictly focused on my own property as required by law. I pulled up my camera feeds, ready to demonstrate this fact, but Barbara wasn't finished. And let's not forget who Mr. Thompson really is. Has anyone actually verified his credentials? For all we know, he could be working with outside criminals, using his so-called security expertise to case our homes. The room erupted in murmurs. I noticed several residents shifting uncomfortably in their seats, eyes darting between Barbara and me. It was classic Patricia tactics: create fear, sow doubt, turn neighbors against each other. I had to admire the efficiency of her proxy attack. Mike tried to restore order, but Barbara had the floor, and she knew it. I move that we immediately suspend Mr. Thompson's gate access pending a full investigation of his activities, for community safety, of course. I second that motion, called out another voice. Thomas Wright, another of Patricia's loyal followers. Better safe than sorry. I closed my laptop slowly, standing to address the room. Before we vote on that motion, I have a few questions for Mrs. Mitchell. First, could you provide specific details about these suspicious vehicles? Times, dates, license plate numbers? Barbara's confidence wavered slightly. Well, I didn't personally see them, but several residents reported names, I asked quietly, documentation. Surely if there were actual security threats, someone filed reports with the gate guards. The residents wish to remain anonymous, Barbara snapped. They fear retaliation. I nodded thoughtfully. I see. And these privacy complaints about my cameras. I assume you have evidence showing my system recording beyond my property lines. Everyone knows you're watching us. Barbara's composure was cracking. Patricia warned us about your type. Coming in here with your fancy technology. Trying to take over. My type? I smiled. You mean security professionals who expose unauthorized access to private property? Speaking of which, I reopened my laptop, connecting it to the room's projector. Let's talk about some interesting activity I've noticed lately. The screen filled with security logs, each entry highlighted in red. In the past 3 days, someone has attempted to access the old key database 17 times. The attempts came from an IP address registered to... Well, look at that. Your house, Mrs. Mitchell. Barbara's face went white. You're making that up. I'm also curious about these emails I discovered, I continued, pulling up another screen. Correspondence between you and Patricia Reynolds, discussing ways to, and I quote, regain control of community access by any means necessary. Care to explain what that means? The room had gone very quiet. Mike Anderson cleared his throat. Mrs. Mitchell, is this true? Barbara was gathering her things, hands shaking. This meeting is a sham. You'll all regret turning against Patricia. She protected us. From what? I asked softly. From having privacy in our own homes. From being able to welcome visitors without fear of surveillance. Tell me, Barbara, how many times did you use Patricia's stolen keys to enter other residents' houses? She froze halfway to the door. The logs don't lie, I said, switching to a new display. Here's your access signature, entering the Martinez family's home while they were on vacation last month, and the Chen residence during Linda's hospital stay. Fascinating timing, considering the violations they were cited for immediately afterward. Thomas Wright was already slipping out the back door, but others were standing up, voices raised in anger and disbelief. The revelation that Patricia's inner circle had been actively invading their homes struck deeper than any vague accusations about suspicious vehicles. I move that we suspend Mrs. Mitchell's gate access pending investigation, called out Emily Foster. Since she's so concerned about community safety. The vote was immediate and nearly unanimous. Barbara fled the room in tears, but I noticed she was already on her phone as she left, no doubt calling Patricia with an update on her failed attempt to undermine me. As the meeting dissolved into heated discussions, Linda Chen approached my table. "Mark, be careful," she whispered. "Patricia may be gone, but she still has supporters here, and now you've humiliated another one publicly." I nodded, already scanning through my security feeds. "Don't worry, Linda. I'm always careful." But later that night, as I reviewed the day's footage, I noticed something concerning. Barbara's car had made 3 loops around my block after the meeting, each time slowing down to almost a crawl as it passed my house. On the final pass, she appeared to be taking photos with her phone. I enhanced the images, focusing on what she was photographing. My security cameras, my windows, my garage. She was mapping my security system's coverage areas. But why? The answer came at exactly 3:47 a.m., when my system detected movement in the blind spot between 2 cameras, exactly where Barbara's photos had focused. A dark figure was attempting to access my garage's electrical panel. I smiled, switching on the hidden camera I'd installed precisely for this scenario. The infrared feed showed me everything. Barbara Mitchell, dressed in black, trying to disable my power supply. Classic amateur move. Rather than confront her directly, I let my automated system handle it. As soon as she touched the panel, bright security lights flooded the area, and a pre-recorded message played at high volume. "Security breach detected. Law enforcement has been notified. Please remain where you are." Barbara ran, of course, but she'd forgotten about the camera she was trying to dodge. I had crystal clear footage of her attempted sabotage, along with the phone call she made, immediately afterward, to Patricia Reynolds' cell phone. By morning, the incident was the talk of the neighborhood. Barbara's garage door wouldn't open, her gate access was permanently revoked, and a very interesting collection of items was discovered in her car. Copies of old house keys, a list of garage codes, and detailed notes about residents' schedules. Mike Anderson called an emergency board meeting. This time, there was no debate. Barbara Mitchell was formally banned from the HOA board and a full audit of her activities was initiated. But as I watched her pack her car and drive away to join Patricia in exile, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. My suspicions were confirmed that evening when I received an anonymous email. You think you've won, but you don't know what's coming. Patricia built this community, and she'll burn it down before letting you destroy everything she created. I traced the email's origin. A public library computer, carefully chosen to hide the sender's identity. Professional paranoia made me run additional security scans, and that's when I found it. A sophisticated attempt to breach the gate system's firewall, probing for weaknesses. Someone with serious technical skills was trying to hack our community's security. Patricia might have been clumsy with her physical key demands, but she apparently had resources I hadn't anticipated. The question was, what else was she willing to do to regain control? I settled in for a long night of system hardening and surveillance. The next move in this suburban chess game would be crucial, and I needed to be ready. Because one thing was becoming clear: Patricia Reynolds wasn't just fighting to control a neighborhood anymore. She was fighting for survival, and that made her more dangerous than ever. The autumn air turned crisp at Oakwood Gates as an unmarked police car pulled up to my driveway. Officer Sarah Davis stepped out, her expression grim as she approached my front door. Through my security feed, I could see she was carrying a thick manila envelope. "Mr. Thompson," she said when I opened the door, "we need to talk about some serious allegations that have been filed against you." I ushered her inside, already suspecting what this was about. My home office had become a command center of sorts, multiple monitors displaying security feeds and system logs. Officer Davis raised an eyebrow at the setup. "Nice equipment," she commented, settling into a chair, "though according to these complaints, maybe a bit too nice." She opened the envelope and spread several documents across my desk. "We've received multiple reports claiming you're using your security system for unauthorized surveillance." I picked up the first report, immediately recognizing the flowing signature at the bottom. Patricia Reynolds might have left the neighborhood, but her influence clearly hadn't waned. The complaint was meticulously detailed, citing specific dates and times when my cameras had allegedly recorded private activities in neighboring yards. "Let me guess," I said. "The other complaints are from Barbara Mitchell and Thomas Wright?" Sarah nodded. "Among others, they're claiming you've created an illegal surveillance network throughout Oakwood Gates. Mrs. Reynolds is particularly concerned about you potentially accessing private information through the gate system." I pulled up my security system's technical specifications on one of the monitors. "Officer Davis, I'd be happy to show you exactly what my cameras can and cannot see. Every device is properly registered and follows all state privacy laws." We spent the next hour going through my system. Sarah was surprisingly tech-savvy, asking detailed questions about coverage areas and data storage. When we finished, she sat back with a thoughtful expression. "Well, Mr. Thompson, I can see why Patricia might feel threatened by your expertise. This is considerably more sophisticated than her old key and clipboard approach." Something in her tone made me look closer. "You've dealt with her before?" Sarah smiled grimly. "Let's just say Mrs. Reynolds has a history of filing complaints against residents who challenge her authority, though usually she sticks to HOA violations, not criminal accusations." "She's escalating," I observed, pulling up another screen. "Take a look at this. In the past week, there have been multiple attempts to breach our gate system's security. Professional attempts using advanced hacking tools." Sarah leaned forward, studying the logs. "You think Patricia hired someone? Makes sense, doesn't it? She couldn't maintain control through traditional means, so now she's trying to prove the new system is vulnerable if she can demonstrate a security breach. She could argue for reinstating the old key system, Sarah finished. Under her control, of course. Our conversation was interrupted by an urgent alert from my system. Someone was attempting to access the gate controls using an old administrative password. I pulled up the security feed just in time to see a sleek black van parked near the main entrance, a figure in dark clothing working on the control panel. "That's happening right now," Sarah said, already reaching for her radio. "I'll call for backup." "Wait." I held up a hand, watching the feed closely. "Let's see what they're after. My system is recording everything." The figure worked for several minutes, clearly knowing what they were doing. Then suddenly, the gate began opening and closing randomly. Residents' phones would be buzzing with alerts, causing exactly the kind of chaos Patricia loved to exploit. "Clever," I muttered. "Create a security incident, then swoop in with a solution. Classic social engineering." Sarah was already heading for the door. "I'll check it out. You stay here and..." Another alert flashed across my screen. "We've got multiple breaches," I announced. "Someone's trying to access the backup generators and there, security cameras around the community center just went dark." "They're creating a diversion," Sarah realized. "But what's the real target?" I was already pulling up additional feeds, scanning for unusual activity. That's when I spotted it, a familiar figure slipping into the community center's side door. Patricia Reynolds herself, carrying what looked like a laptop. "The server room," I said. "All the HOA's digital records are stored there, including evidence of her unauthorized access. If she can delete that data..." Sarah was already calling for additional units, but we both knew they wouldn't arrive in time. I grabbed my own laptop and headed for the door. "Mr. Thompson, you should stay here. This is a police matter now." I shook my head. "With all due respect, officer, you don't know our systems like I do. She's trying to destroy evidence of her crimes, and I'm not going to let that happen." The drive to the community center took less than 2 minutes. The black van was gone from the gate, its job as a diversion apparently complete. The building's external lights were dark, but I could see the glow of a screen through the server room's window. Sarah positioned herself at the main entrance while I accessed the building through my emergency override code. The hallways were dark, but I knew the layout by heart. As we approached the server room, I could hear the rapid clicking of keyboard keys. "Almost done," Patricia's voice drifted through the door. "Another minute and it'll all be gone. Then let's see them prove anything." I nodded to Sarah, who drew her weapon. "Police, step away from the computer." The typing stopped. Through the door's window, I could see Patricia freeze, then slowly reach for something in her bag. "Mrs. Reynolds," Sarah called out, "show me your hands and step into the hallway." Instead, Patricia grabbed what she'd been reaching for, a small device that made my blood run cold. A portable EMP generator, capable of frying every piece of electronic equipment in the room. "Don't come any closer," Patricia warned, her voice shaking. "One push of this button and everything gets wiped. All your precious evidence, all your security systems, everything." I stepped into view, letting her see me. "Think about what you're doing, Patricia. That's not just HOA data in there. That's every resident's personal information, security codes, emergency contacts. You'd be putting the entire community at risk." Patricia's laugh had an edge of hysteria. "The community. You destroyed this community the moment you arrived with your digital locks and your cameras and your logs. I protected these people. I kept them safe." "By breaking into their homes," I asked quietly. "By using their private information to control them. That's not protection, Patricia. That's abuse of power." Her hand tightened on the EMP device. "You don't understand. I built this place. Everything I did was for the greater good. Sometimes people need a firm hand to guide them, to maintain order." Order through fear isn't order at all, I said, taking a careful step forward. You're not protecting anyone anymore. You're just trying to hide your crimes. Patricia's face contorted. Stay back, I'll do it. I'll wipe everything. No, I said calmly, you won't, because I already backed up all the evidence to an off-site server. Destroying these computers won't change anything except adding another charge to your record. Her composure cracked. You're lying. Am I? Check your email. You should have received an automated notification when the backup completed. Oh, about 10 minutes ago. Patricia fumbled for her phone with her free hand, her eyes widening as she saw the notification. In that moment of distraction, Sarah moved. The EMP device clattered to the floor, and Patricia found herself being handcuffed for the second time that month. Patricia Reynolds, Sarah recited. You're under arrest for attempted cybercrimes, breaking and entering, and destruction of property. You have the right to remain silent. As they led Patricia away, I surveyed the server room. Her attempt to delete files had failed. Our security was better than that. But on the screen, I could see what she'd been trying to erase. Years of logs showing unauthorized access, financial irregularities, and private information she'd collected on every resident. Mike Anderson arrived with several other board members just as the police were finishing their investigation. The black van had been found abandoned near the community entrance, its driver long gone. Patricia's hired hacker had apparently decided not to stick around when things went south. Is it true? Mike asked, staring at the police car where Patricia sat. She really tried to destroy everything? I nodded, showing him the access logs. She was desperate. When you build your power on secrets and fear, exposure is the greatest threat. As word spread through the community, residents gathered outside, watching as Patricia was driven away. Her face was visible through the car window, and I was struck by how small she looked now, how ordinary without her carefully constructed aura of authority. Derek Reynolds arrived last, looking both exhausted and relieved. I knew something like this would happen, he said quietly. She's been unraveling ever since you exposed her system. This morning she was talking about how she'd rather burn everything down than let someone else control it. I thought about the EMP device, how close we'd come to losing vital community data. She forgot the most important rule of security, I said. The best systems protect people, not power. The next few days brought more revelations as forensic analysts went through Patricia's computers. The scope of her surveillance was staggering. Years of collected data, private information, and detailed notes on every resident. She'd used this information not just to maintain control, but to manipulate property values, influence sales, and keep certain people out of the community entirely. A class action lawsuit was already being prepared. Several residents discovered their violations had been completely fabricated, their fines going into unauthorized accounts. The web of deception and control was finally unraveling. But as I watched the neighborhood begin to heal, I couldn't help but wonder about the deeper implications. How many other communities had their own Patricia Reynolds using fear and control under the guise of protection? How many people accepted surveillance and invasion of privacy as the price of security? The gate system continued its quiet operation, each authorized access logged and transparent. No more secret keys, no more hidden violations, no more fear of unexpected inspections. The residents of Oakwood Gates were finally free to simply be neighbors, not subjects. As for Patricia, her legal troubles were just beginning. The district attorney was particularly interested in the financial aspects of her schemes. It seemed the fines she'd collected over the years had funded quite a luxurious lifestyle. The community held a special meeting to elect new leadership and establish clear guidelines for security and privacy. The old rules Patricia's rules were ceremonially shredded, replaced by transparent policies that protected residents rather than controlled them. Linda Chen summed it up best during the meeting. "We thought we needed someone to keep us in line, to maintain order. What we really needed was to trust each other and stand up to those who abuse power." The autumn air carried away the last traces of Patricia's reign at Oakwood Gates, leaving behind a community stronger for having faced its own demons. Sometimes the greatest threats don't come from outside our gates, but from those who claim to protect us from within. The once tranquil atmosphere of Oakwood Gates felt strangely unsettling despite Patricia's arrest. The neighborhood rhythms had shifted, residents casting wary glances at security cameras and whispering among themselves about what other secrets might emerge from the investigation. A peculiar fog had settled over the community, both literal and metaphorical, as fall crept deeper into winter. My morning routine was interrupted by an urgent text from Officer Sarah Davis. "Check your email. New developments." The message that awaited me sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the weather. Patricia Reynolds had been released on bail, with conditions that should have included staying away from Oakwood Gates. But the security logs told a different story. Multiple failed access attempts had been recorded overnight, using patterns that seemed eerily familiar. I was reviewing the data when my doorbell chimed. Through the security feed, I saw Derek Reynolds standing on my porch, looking even more haggard than the last time I'd seen him. His usual golf attire had been replaced by rumpled business casual, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "Mark," he said as soon as I opened the door, "we need to talk. It's about Patricia. She's not done with this place." I ushered him into my office, noting how his gaze darted nervously around the security screens. "The overnight access attempts," I said. "That was her, wasn't it?" Derek nodded, slumping into a chair. "She's obsessed. Ever since she got out, she's been holed up in her sister's basement, surrounded by computers. She keeps talking about reclaiming what's rightfully hers. I tried to reason with her, but she's hired someone," Derek continued, pulling out his phone to show me a series of text messages. "Some kind of cybersecurity specialist she found online. She's convinced that if she can prove your system is flawed, the community will beg her to come back." I studied the messages, my professional instincts kicking into high gear. The technical language suggested someone with genuine expertise, not just another amateur hacker. "Has she mentioned any specific plans?" Derek's hands twisted nervously in his lap. "Just fragments. She keeps talking about something called Operation Reset. Said it would restore the natural order. But last night..." He glanced around as if expecting Patricia to materialize from the shadows. "Last night, she was on the phone with someone, discussing ways to trigger a complete system shutdown during the upcoming community meeting." I pulled up the community calendar on one of my monitors. The first post-Patricia HOA meeting was scheduled for tomorrow evening. The agenda included voting on new security protocols and officially dissolving many of her old rules. The timing couldn't be coincidental. "There's something else," Derek added, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "She's been contacting other HOA presidents in the area, telling them your security system is part of some big tech company scheme to collect resident data. She's trying to build some kind of coalition against digital security systems." A notification popped up on my screen, another failed access attempt at the main gate. The code sequence was sophisticated, probing for weaknesses in our encryption. Whoever Patricia had hired knew their stuff. "Mr. Reynolds," I said carefully, "I need to know if you've shared any of our security protocols with Patricia since her arrest." Derek's face flushed. She's still my wife. Sometimes she seems so rational, so convinced she's protecting people. Last week she was crying about how vulnerable everyone was without her oversight. I might have mentioned something about the new backup systems. Perfect. Patricia's tech expert would know exactly where to focus their attack. I began typing rapidly, reinforcing our secondary firewalls. Does she have access to your devices? Phone, laptop, anything? No, I changed all my passwords like you suggested, but... Derek reached into his pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. She gave me this yesterday, asked me to plug it into one of the community center computers, said it contained evidence that would open everyone's eyes to the truth. I took the drive carefully, already planning how to analyze it. In a secure environment. Thank you for bringing this to me. And Derek, you should stay somewhere else for a few days, just in case. After Derek left, I called Officer Davis to update her on the situation. She promised to increase patrols around the neighborhood and monitor Patricia's movements, but we both knew it might not be enough. Someone with her knowledge of the community and a skilled hacker on her side could cause serious damage. I spent the next several hours in a digital cat-and-mouse game with our mysterious attacker. They were good, probing our defenses from multiple angles, using sophisticated masking techniques to hide their location. But they made one crucial mistake. Their attack patterns revealed they were working from a limited data set, one that didn't include our most recent security updates. At precisely 3:17 p.m., my phone rang. The number was blocked, but I knew who it would be. "Hello, Patricia," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Impressed by my new friend's capabilities?" She sounded different, more intense, almost feverish. "This is just a taste of what's coming. You thought you could just walk in and dismantle everything I built?" I watched another failed access attempt scroll across my screen. "Your friend is working with outdated information, Patricia. How much are you paying them to fail?" Her laugh had an edge of hysteria. "Money doesn't matter. What matters is showing everyone the truth. You're not their protector, Mark. You're just another tech company stooge, mining their data, selling their privacy. Tomorrow night, they'll all see exactly what your precious digital security really means." Is that what Operation Reset is about? Creating panic to prove a point? There was a moment of silence. "How did you—" Derek. Of course. My soft-hearted husband, always trying to play both sides, no matter, even knowing about it won't help you stop it. "Patricia, think about what you're doing. Attacking the community's security system won't prove you were right. It'll just put people at risk." "I put no one at risk," she snapped. "Everything I did was to protect them. The keys, the monitoring, the rules, it all served a purpose. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? All you see is data and code. I saw people. I knew what they needed even when they didn't know themselves." A new alert flashed on my screen. Someone was trying to access the community's emergency alert system. "Your hacker's getting sloppy, Patricia. Desperate moves lead to mistakes." "The only mistake was letting you take control," she hissed. "But that ends tomorrow. When your system fails, when chaos erupts, they'll remember why they needed me. Sometimes people have to be shown the cost of freedom before they understand the value of control." The line went dead. I immediately began strengthening the emergency alert system security, but my mind was racing. Patricia's words revealed more than she intended. This wasn't just about regaining control, it was about vindication. She wanted to prove that her authoritarian approach was necessary for community safety. I pulled up the USB drive Derek had brought, running it through multiple security scans. As expected, it contained malware, sophisticated programs designed to create backdoors in our system. But buried in the code was something else: GPS coordinates. A quick search revealed the location: a small office building on the outskirts of town. The perfect place for a rogue hacker to set up operations, close enough to maintain a strong signal to our systems, but far enough to avoid detection. I sent the information to Officer Davis, then settled in for a long night of system fortification. Patricia's expert would keep probing for weaknesses, looking for any gap in our defenses. But they weren't the only ones who could play this game. As midnight approached, I initiated my own carefully planned protocol. To anyone monitoring our system, it would appear that their attacks were finally succeeding. Small glitches began, appearing nothing critical, just enough to suggest growing vulnerability. If Patricia and her hacker took the bait, they'd concentrate their efforts on exactly the areas I wanted them to target. The community meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. tomorrow. Whatever Operation Reset entailed, I had less than 20 hours to prepare. But as I watched another wave of attacks break harmlessly against our reinforced firewalls, I couldn't help but smile. Patricia had forgotten the first rule of digital security. Sometimes the best defense is making your opponent think they're winning. Just after 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Officer Davis. "Building secured, one suspect in custody. You won't believe who it is." The attached photo showed a familiar face, Thomas Wright, Patricia's former ally from the HOA board, being led out of the office building in handcuffs. Of course, who better to help attack the system than someone who had intimate knowledge of the community's operations? But Thomas was just a pawn. The real threat was still out there, probably watching from her sister's basement as her plans began to unravel. The question was, what would Patricia do when she realized her technical expert had been neutralized? Someone that obsessed with control wouldn't simply give up. As if in answer, my security system pinged with an unusual alert. Someone was broadcasting a wireless signal throughout the neighborhood, trying to connect to residents' personal devices. The signature was crude but effective. A mass phishing attempt disguised as a community safety alert. I quickly sent out a legitimate warning to all residents, but the damage was already spreading. Social media was lighting up with confused posts from neighbors who had clicked the malicious link. Patricia might not be able to breach our main security system, but she could still create chaos through simpler means. The sun was rising over Oakwood Gates as I finished damage control protocols. In a few hours, residents would begin their day, most unaware of the digital battle that had raged through the night. But Patricia was still out there, and the community meeting was approaching. Whatever she had planned for Operation Reset, today would be the endgame. I reviewed the security footage one last time, looking for any patterns I might have missed. That's when I noticed something odd. A series of deliveries to various houses throughout the neighborhood, all from the same unmarked van. The driver's face was never clearly visible, but their movements seemed familiar. A quick check of resident schedules showed that most of these deliveries had been made to empty houses. Whatever was in those packages, it couldn't be good. The real question was, should I cancel the community meeting, potentially playing into Patricia's hands, or proceed as planned and deal with whatever chaos she had orchestrated? The answer would have to wait. Right now, I needed coffee, a shower, and a clear head. Because one thing was certain, tonight's meeting would either end Patricia's influence over Oakwood Gates forever, or prove her right about the vulnerabilities she claimed existed all along. The stakes couldn't be higher, and there was no room for error. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as residents filed in for the evening meeting. The usual pleasant chatter was replaced by tense whispers and concerned glances. Everyone had received my warning about the phishing attempt, but the atmosphere of unease lingered like a heavy fog. Mike Anderson paced near the podium, checking his watch every few minutes. Through my security feeds, I monitored the parking lot, watching for any sign of Patricia or her remaining allies. The unmarked van from the morning deliveries hadn't reappeared, but something about those packages still nagged at my consciousness. Linda Chen approached my usual spot at the back of the room, her normally cheerful expression clouded with worry. "Mark, Something strange is happening with our phones. Everyone's getting these weird text messages about an emergency system upgrade. I pulled out my laptop, quickly tracing the source of the messages. The signal was bouncing between multiple towers, making it difficult to pinpoint the origin. Classic misdirection technique. Don't click any links, I advised. It's another attempt to spread malware. The room grew more crowded as 7 o'clock approached. I noticed several unfamiliar faces in the audience, residents who rarely attended meetings before. Their presence set off warning bells in my security-trained mind. Why would they choose this particular meeting to suddenly become involved in community affairs? Officer Sarah Davis slipped in through the side door, making her way discreetly to my position. "Thomas Wright isn't talking," she murmured, "but we found something interesting in his office. Blueprints of the community center's electrical system, with certain junction boxes marked." I was about to respond when the lights flickered briefly. A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd. Mike Anderson cleared his throat, tapping the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. I know we're all a bit on edge after recent events, but..." The lights went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. Panicked voices rose from the crowd, along with the blue glow of cell phone screens. But something was wrong. The emergency backup lights hadn't activated. "Everyone stay calm," I called out, already pulling up the building's electrical diagnostics on my laptop. The backup generator was showing as online, but its signal was being blocked. Someone had installed a signal jammer. Then, every phone in the room buzzed simultaneously. A message appeared on their screens. "This is what happens when you trust digital security. Your old president wouldn't have let this happen." The projector screen at the front of the room suddenly flickered to life, displaying a familiar face. Patricia Reynolds smiled down at the assembled residents, her image slightly distorted, but her voice clear through the room's speakers. "My dear neighbors," she began, "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but sometimes a demonstration is worth more than words. Your wonderful new security expert promised to keep you safe with his fancy digital systems, but look how easily they can be compromised." I was already tracing the video feed, but Patricia had clearly prepared for this. The signal was being routed through multiple proxy servers, making it nearly impossible to locate her actual position. "What you're experiencing now is just a taste of what could happen," Patricia continued. "Think about it. Your gate controls, your security cameras, your emergency response systems, all vulnerable to anyone with the right knowledge. Is this really safer than my old-fashioned key system?" The crowd stirred uneasily. I caught glimpses of the unfamiliar faces I'd noticed earlier. They were moving through the darkness, positioning themselves near the exits. This wasn't just about creating chaos. It was a carefully orchestrated power play. "But I'm not unreasonable." Patricia's voice took on a gentler tone. "I'm willing to help fix this situation. All you have to do is reinstate me as HOA president, return to the old security protocols, and this unfortunate demonstration will end. Otherwise..." She paused, for effect. "Well, let's just say this is only the beginning of what could go wrong in a fully digital community." Mike Anderson stepped forward, his voice steady despite the darkness. "This is ridiculous, Patricia. You're proving exactly why we removed you from power. This kind of manipulation..." "Manipulation?" Patricia laughed. "I prefer to think of it as education. Sometimes people need to experience problems before they can appreciate solutions. Speaking of which, a new wave of text messages swept through the room. Gate system failure detected. All entries now unrestricted. Panic began to spread as residents realized they couldn't verify if their homes were secure. Patricia's image smiled down at them, a benevolent dictator waiting for her subjects to beg for her return. But she had made one critical mistake. While everyone's attention was focused on the power outage and her video performance, I'd been running a trace on the signal jammer. Its signature matched the packages delivered earlier. Patricia had used her remaining supporters to plant signal-blocking devices throughout the neighborhood. I caught Officer Davis's eye and nodded toward one of the unfamiliar faces near the door. She understood immediately, quietly radioing for backup while moving into position. "You see," Patricia continued her monologue, "true security isn't about fancy technology. It's about having someone who cares enough to maintain proper oversight, someone who understands that sometimes privacy must be sacrificed for safety." You mean someone who breaks into people's homes?" I called out, my voice carrying through the darkness. "Someone who collected private information to blackmail residents. Is that your definition of safety, Patricia?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Mr. Thompson, always trying to twist things to suit your narrative. But look around, your system has failed. The community is vulnerable. Who will protect them now?" I stood up, letting my laptop screen illuminate my face. "That's where you're wrong, Patricia. My system hasn't failed at all." With a few keystrokes, I activated my backup protocol. Every phone in the room received a new message. "Secondary security system engaged. All properties secured." Patricia's image flickered. "What? That's impossible." "The signal jammers were detected and isolated the moment they were activated," I finished for her. "Did you really think I wouldn't have contingencies for this exact scenario? Every attempt to breach our security has been logged and traced. The police are already moving to those locations." As if on cue, Officer Davis and her backup team began detaining Patricia's planted supporters. The lights flickered back on as my override commands disabled the signal jammers one by one. "This is your last warning," Patricia's voice had lost its smooth confidence. "Return control to me, or what?" I challenged. "You'll release the personal information you stole? Share the illegal recordings you made? Every threat you make just adds to the criminal charges against you." A new window opened on my laptop. The trace program had finally pinpointed her location. Not her sister's basement after all, but a small office above a coffee shop just outside the neighborhood. "It's over, Patricia," I announced. "The police are on their way to your location now. Every piece of evidence you tried to destroy has been preserved. Every attack you launched has been recorded. You didn't expose the weaknesses in our digital security. You proved exactly why we needed to upgrade from your outdated methods." The projector screen went dark as Patricia cut the connection. Around the room, residents began checking their phones, confirming that their homes were indeed secure. The planted troublemakers were led away in handcuffs, their role in the scheme now painfully obvious. Mike Anderson called the meeting back to order, his voice stronger now. "Well, I think we've all just witnessed a perfect example of why our community needed to change. Mrs. Reynolds claimed to protect us, but her actions tonight endangered everyone in this room." Linda Chen stood up. "I've lived here for 15 years, and I never felt less safe than when Patricia was in charge, always wondering if she was watching, if she had copies of my keys, if my private conversations were being recorded." Other residents began sharing similar stories. The constant fear of violations, the arbitrary rules, the feeling of being under surveillance. Patricia's attempt to demonstrate the dangers of digital security had instead reminded everyone of the true danger, allowing one person to hold unchecked power over an entire community. Officer Davis returned to the room, a satisfied smile on her face. "Patricia Reynolds is in custody. Again. This time with several new charges to answer for." The meeting continued, but with a different energy now. Residents who had been hesitant to speak up before shared their ideas for community governance. Plans were made to create a security oversight committee, ensuring that no single person could ever again abuse their position of authority. As the discussions wound down, Derek Reynolds approached me, looking both relieved and devastated. "I should have seen it coming," he said quietly. The deliveries, the strange phone calls. I knew she was planning something, but I never imagined she'd go this far. I nodded sympathetically. She believed she was right. That's what made her dangerous. She couldn't accept that true security comes from transparency and trust, not control and fear. The community center slowly emptied as residents headed home, many stopping to thank me or share their own stories of Patricia's reign. But I remained, focused on my security feeds, watching for any last-minute surprises. People like Patricia often had one final card to play. Sure enough, just before midnight, my system detected a new threat, a pre-programmed data dump set to release all of Patricia's collected surveillance to the public. Another attempt to create chaos, even from behind bars. But I had anticipated this too. The data was intercepted, preserved as evidence, and secured before it could spread. Patricia's last grasp at control had failed, just like all her others. As I finally headed home in the early hours of the morning, I saw lights on in many houses, neighbors talking, sharing, processing the events of the night. Patricia had tried to prove that her authoritarian approach was necessary for community safety. Instead, she had brought the community together in ways her forced oversight never could. The gates of Oakwood closed behind me, their digital sensors working silently and efficiently. No more secret keys, no more hidden cameras, no more fear of unexpected inspections. Just a community of people who had learned the hard way that true security isn't about controlling others. It's about building trust and standing together against those who would abuse power. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, the night was quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of security systems working as they should, protecting without imprisoning, watching without invading, serving the community rather than controlling it. A crisp winter morning dawned over Oakwood Gates as police cars lined the community center parking lot. Detective James Morrison stood beside me, reviewing the latest evidence collected from Patricia's makeshift command center above the coffee shop. The scale of her planned disruption was staggering. Not just signal jammers and malware, but detailed dossiers on every resident. She had contingency plans for everything, Morrison muttered, flipping through pages of handwritten notes. Backdoor access to personal computers, compiled lists of daily routines, even medical records. The woman was running her own private surveillance state. I nodded, scanning through the data recovered from her devices. The question is, how much of this information is still out there? We know she had accomplices we haven't identified yet. The detective's phone buzzed. Another update from the forensics team. His expression darkened as he read the message. They found something in her storage unit. Dozens of external hard drives, all containing what appears to be recorded conversations from inside people's homes. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the winter air. She must have installed listening devices during her unauthorized inspections. The question is, where are those devices now? Before Morrison could respond, Linda Chen's car pulled up beside us. She hurried over, clutching her tablet. "Mark, you need to see this. Someone's posting excerpts from Patricia's files on the neighborhood social media groups. Private information, security vulnerabilities, everything." I took the tablet, quickly scanning through the posts. They were appearing under multiple anonymous accounts, each revealing more damaging information. But something about the posting pattern seemed familiar. "It's Barbara Mitchell," I said, recognizing her digital fingerprint. "She must have had backup copies of Patricia's data. She's trying to create panic, make people think their privacy is still compromised." Morrison was already on his radio, coordinating with his cybercrimes unit. But we all knew that once information started spreading online, it was nearly impossible to contain completely. "There's something else," Linda added, lowering her voice. "People are reporting strange noises in their homes. Like electronic interference or static. What if those listening devices are still active? I activated my signal detection software, scanning for any unusual frequencies in the area. Almost immediately, my system picked up dozens of small transmissions, scattered throughout the neighborhood. The signals were weak but numerous, creating a web of surveillance that still lingered in Patricia's absence. "We need to sweep every house," I told Morrison. "These devices could be anywhere: smoke detectors, light fixtures, even inside outlet covers. Patricia had years to plant them." Mike Anderson joined our group, his face grim. "The posts are spreading. People are starting to panic. Some residents are talking about moving out, saying they can't trust their own homes anymore." A new notification popped up on my laptop. Someone was attempting to access these hidden devices remotely. The signal originated from an IP address I didn't recognize, but the intrusion pattern was unmistakably similar to Patricia's previous attacks. "She's got someone else working with her," I muttered, fingers flying across the keyboard as I traced the signal. "Even from jail, she's trying to maintain control." Morrison leaned over my shoulder, watching the data stream. "Can you block the access?" "I can do better than that," I replied, implementing a trace protocol I'd developed. "Whoever's trying to activate these devices just gave us a digital trail to follow." Linda's tablet chimed with another alert. "The anonymous posts are getting more specific. They're revealing individual residents' personal information, affairs, financial troubles, medical conditions. Barbara's trying to show everyone what Patricia knew about them." I quickly pulled up Barbara's likely location based on her posting patterns. "She's working from a mobile hotspot, moving around the neighborhood, probably parked somewhere watching the chaos unfold." Morrison dispatched officers to search for her vehicle, while I focused on tracking down the mystery hacker attempting to access the listening devices. The signal bounced between several locations, but there was something odd about its movement pattern. "Wait a minute," I said, pulling up a map overlay. "These access points, they're all along Derek's normal jogging route." Mike Anderson's eyes widened. "Derek, you think he's involved?" "Not directly," I replied, studying the data. "But what if Patricia memorized his routine? She would know exactly where to place signal repeaters to maintain contact with her surveillance network." A quick check of the jail's visitor log confirmed my suspicion. Derek had visited Patricia that morning. She could have given him instructions, told him where to go to unknowingly activate her backup system. I called Derek immediately. He answered on the first ring, sounding out of breath. "Mark, what's wrong?" "Derek, where are you right now?" "Just finishing my morning run." "Why?" "Stay where you are. Don't move. You're carrying something that's broadcasting a signal." There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "The water bottle. Patricia asked me to carry it today, said she was worried about me staying hydrated in the cold." "Don't touch it," I warned. "We'll have a bomb squad unit there in 2 minutes." As we waited for the all clear, more residents arrived at the community center, many looking shell-shocked from the revelations appearing online. Years of private moments, personal struggles, and intimate conversations had been recorded and catalogued by Patricia's obsessive surveillance. The bomb squad reported back. The water bottle contained a sophisticated relay device designed to activate dormant listening equipment within its range. Derek had been unknowingly helping Patricia maintain her control over the community even after her arrest. But we still had to deal with Barbara Mitchell's information warfare. Her posts were causing exactly the kind of chaos Patricia wanted, neighbor turning against neighbor as their private information became public. "We need to get ahead of this," I told Morrison. "These people deserve to know what was done to them, but not like this. Not as weapons to tear the community apart." Linda spoke up, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. "What if we turn it around? Instead of letting Barbara reveal these secrets to hurt people, we help everyone find and remove Patricia's surveillance devices. Show them they can take back their privacy." It was a good idea. I quickly set up a scanning system that residents could use to detect any hidden devices in their homes. Teams of volunteers, led by police technicians, began going house to house. The discoveries were shocking. Cameras hidden in air vents, microphones embedded in wall switches, data skimmers attached to home networks. Patricia's surveillance apparatus was more extensive than anyone had imagined. As the sweep continued, I tracked Barbara's mobile signal as she moved through the neighborhood. She was getting sloppy, probably frustrated that her information dumps weren't causing the complete social collapse she and Patricia had hoped for. Finally, her signal stabilized. She had stopped moving. I sent the coordinates to Morrison, who dispatched officers to the location. They found her parked behind the community pool, multiple phones and tablets spread across her passenger seat as she frantically posted more revelations. But something wasn't right. Barbara's expression when they arrested her wasn't angry or defiant. She looked almost relieved, as if this had all been a distraction. I was reviewing the surveillance data when I noticed an anomaly in the network traffic. While everyone was focused on Barbara's posts and the listening devices, someone had been quietly accessing the community's backup servers. The infiltration was subtle, professional, nothing like Patricia's usual aggressive tactics. This was someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. "Morrison," I called out, already tracing the intrusion. "We need to check Patricia's jail cell, now." The detective made the call, his face darkening as he listened to the response. "She's gone. Use the morning's chaos as cover for an escape. They found a note in her cell. A queen always has a backup plan." I stared at my screens, watching as the unknown hacker extracted files from our secure storage. They weren't taking resident information or surveillance data. They were downloading technical specifications, security protocols, everything needed to replicate our digital infrastructure. "She's not trying to destroy the system anymore," I realized. "She's trying to steal it, build her own version somewhere else." Morrison was already coordinating with other jurisdictions, but we all knew finding Patricia wouldn't be easy. She had spent years planning for every contingency, including her own downfall. The winter sun cast long shadows across Oakwood Gates as residents continued discovering and removing the remnants of Patricia's surveillance state. Each hidden device, each secret recording, revealed the true extent of her obsession with control. But as I watched neighbors helping neighbors sweep their homes clean, I saw something Patricia hadn't counted on. Her attempt to tear the community apart had instead brought them closer together. People shared stories of the moments she had stolen from them, supporting each other through the violation of their privacy. The question now was, where would Patricia strike next? And how many other communities might be vulnerable to her particular brand of digital authoritarianism? As night fell, I received one final alert, a message bouncing through so many proxies it was practically untraceable. "You won this round, Mr. Thompson, but there are so many other neighborhoods out there, so many people who don't even know. They need protecting. The game isn't over, it's just moving to a bigger board." I saved the message, adding it to the growing evidence file. Patricia Reynolds might have escaped, but she had underestimated one crucial fact. She wasn't the only one who could build a network. As her surveillance web unraveled in Oakwood Gates, a new network was forming, one built on trust, transparency, and mutual support. The battle for control of Oakwood Gates was over. The war for community privacy and security was just beginning. A late winter storm battered Oakwood Gates as Detective Morrison and I huddled over my security monitors. 3 weeks had passed since Patricia's escape, and the digital breadcrumbs we'd been following had led us to an unsettling discovery. Similar security systems appearing in gated communities across the state, each bearing her distinctive technical signature. "Look at this pattern," I said, highlighting clusters of data on the map. She's targeting neighborhoods with aging infrastructure, offering them cutting-edge security at suspiciously low prices. Classic social engineering. Morrison rubbed his tired eyes. Through shell companies and proxies, I assume, making it impossible to trace back to her directly. Before I could respond, my system flagged an incoming email from an anonymous source. The subject line made my blood run cold. Missing something? The attachment was a video file, clearly recorded inside my own home office. The timestamp showed it was from months ago, before we'd discovered Patricia's surveillance network. There I was, working at my desk, completely unaware of being watched. "She's taunting us," Morrison growled, showing that she still has cards to play. The storm intensified outside as we analyzed the video's metadata. Thunder rattled the windows, and for a moment, the power flickered ominously. My backup generators hummed to life, but something felt off about the brief outage. I pulled up the neighborhood power grid readings. "That wasn't the storm," I muttered, noticing patterns in the electrical fluctuations. "Someone's testing our vulnerabilities, seeing how our systems respond to power interruptions." A notification popped up on my phone, an alert from an old colleague in network security. He'd spotted someone trying to sell detailed HOA security specifications on the dark web. The asking price wasn't in dollars, but in access. Specifically, administrator credentials for gated community systems. She's building a network, I realized. Not just surveillance anymore. She's creating her own private empire of controlled communities. Morrison's phone buzzed with an update from his cybercrimes unit. They'd traced some of Patricia's recent activities to a small tech consulting firm that had suddenly started winning contracts with HOAs across 3 states. "Smart move," I admitted grudgingly. "She's legitimizing her operation, hiding in plain sight behind corporate paperwork and service agreements." The storm's intensity increased, rain lashing against the windows as if nature itself was reflecting. The growing tension, another power fluctuation rippled through the grid, this one lasting slightly longer. I was about to investigate when Linda Chen burst into my office, soaked from the rain. "Mark, something's happening at the gate. The card readers are acting strange, denying access randomly. Mrs. Foster's been stuck outside for 10 minutes. My security feeds confirmed it. The gate system was glitching, but not from any external attack. The malfunctions were coming from inside our own network, triggered by authorized maintenance protocols. Someone's using our own security features. Against us, I said, fingers flying across the keyboard as I traced the source. These aren't glitches, they're tests. Patricia's probing for weaknesses in the upgrades we made after she left. Morrison leaned closer to the monitors. Can you block it? Not without shutting down critical systems. She's embedded her tests in legitimate security processes. If I block them, I risk creating real vulnerabilities. Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a deafening thunderclap. In that moment of natural chaos, my systems detected something else, a subtle data transfer beginning in the background, using our own backup protocols as cover. She's not just testing defenses, I realized, watching the pattern emerge. She's using our security responses to map the entire neighborhood. Every camera angle, every sensor location, every blind spot. Linda's tablet chimed with a notification from the community message board. Residents were reporting strange technical issues. Garage doors opening randomly, security cameras rotating on their own, smart home systems activating without command. It's a demonstration, Morrison said grimly, showing everyone that their technology can be turned against them. I nodded, already implementing countermeasures. She's trying to prove her point about digital vulnerability, make everyone question whether the old key system was better after all. Another email arrived, this one addressed to every resident. In Oakwood Gates, feeling secure with your digital guardians. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Your former president sends her regards. The message was followed by a cascade of system alerts as house after house reported technical malfunctions. Patricia wasn't just attacking our security, she was orchestrating a symphony of technological chaos. "Mark," Linda said quietly, "people are scared. This is exactly what she wants, isn't it? To make us doubt everything you've built?" She was right. Fear was Patricia's most powerful weapon, and she wielded it expertly. But as I watched the patterns in her attack, something caught my attention, a flaw in her strategy. "She's using our own systems, our own protocols," I explained, highlighting data streams on my monitors. "But that means she's bound by the same rules and limitations we are, and I just found a way to turn that against her." I began implementing a new security protocol, one that would use Patricia's own testing methods to trace her connection back to its source. It was risky. We'd have to let her continue her demonstration long enough to establish a solid trace. "How long?" Morrison asked, understanding the plan immediately. 10 minutes, maybe 15. We need her to stay connected, keep thinking she's in control." Linda looked nervous. "The residents will have to trust us a little longer," I finished. "Meanwhile, we need to get ahead of her psychological warfare." I drafted a quick message to the community, explaining that we were tracking an unauthorized system test and asking for their patience. It wasn't the whole truth, but it would hopefully prevent the kind of panic Patricia was trying to create. The storm reached its peak as we watched the trace program work. Lightning illuminated the neighborhood in stark flashes, while thunder shook the foundations of houses. Through it all, Patricia's digital invasion continued, growing bolder with each passing minute. Garage doors opened and closed in synchronized patterns. Security cameras performed coordinated sweeps. Smart home systems played phantom music through empty houses. It was a calculated display of power, designed to demonstrate how thoroughly she could control our digital lives. But with each new manipulation, her signal became clearer. The trace program followed her digital footprints through layers of proxies and redirects, slowly closing in on her true location. "Got you," I muttered as the final pieces fell into place. The signal was coming from a high-rise office building in the business district, specifically the headquarters of her new technology consulting firm. Morrison was already calling in tactical teams, but I noticed something else in the data stream. Patricia wasn't just controlling our systems, she was downloading something. Massive amounts of data were being extracted from our secure servers. "What's she taking?" Linda asked, watching the transfer rates climb. I dug deeper into the logs and felt my stomach drop. Everything. Resident profiles, security protocols, system architecture. She's stealing our entire digital infrastructure. To replicate it elsewhere, Morrison realized. Create the same setup in other communities, but under her control from the start. The storm began to ease as we watched Patricia's endgame unfold. She had used our own security protocols to create a backdoor, one that would be nearly impossible to detect once she withdrew. But she had made one critical mistake. In her determination to prove digital vulnerability, she had exposed her own operation. The trace we'd established wouldn't just lead us to her current location. It would reveal every community system she had already compromised. "Detective," I said, sending him the trace data, "I think you're about to uncover a massive criminal enterprise. Patricia hasn't just been selling security systems, she's been building her own private surveillance network across multiple states." Morrison's eyes widened as he reviewed the information. "This is bigger than we thought. She's not just a rogue HOA president anymore, she's running a sophisticated cyber criminal operation." Linda looked out at the storm-battered neighborhood. where residents were finally regaining normal control of their systems. What do we tell everyone? How do we explain that their private information might be compromised again? I considered carefully before answering. We tell them the truth, that Patricia tried to use their fear against them, but in doing so, she revealed her own vulnerabilities. We show them that real security isn't about control or surveillance. It's about transparency and trust. The last rumbles of thunder faded into the distance as emergency vehicles began converging on the office building downtown. Patricia's demonstration of power had backfired spectacularly, exposing not just her location, but her entire criminal network. But as I watched the data transfers finally cease, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Patricia had proven herself too clever, too prepared to be caught this easily. Whatever we found in that office building, I suspected it would only be the surface of her operation. The real question was, how many other communities had already fallen under her influence? And what would they find when they finally looked behind their own digital curtains? As the night wore on and the storm clouds parted, those questions hung in the air like the lingering scent of rain. The battle for Oakwood Gates might be reaching its conclusion, but the war for community privacy and security was spreading far beyond our borders. Early morning sunlight filtered through the office windows of Patricia's technology consulting firm as Detective Morrison and I sifted through the evidence. The raid had revealed a sophisticated operations center, but Patricia herself was nowhere to be found. Instead, we discovered dozens of monitors displaying live feeds from various gated communities across the state. "Look at this," Morrison said, pointing to a detailed organizational chart. "She's created a whole hierarchy, local administrators in each community, all reporting through encrypted channels to a central control system." I studied the network architecture displayed on one of the screens. The setup was eerily familiar, a modified version of my own security system, twisted to serve Patricia's obsession with control. But something about the implementation seemed off, almost deliberately flawed. "This is too easy," I muttered, scanning through files left conspicuously on the main computer. "Patricia's smarter than this. She wouldn't leave her entire operation exposed unless..." A notification flashed across my laptop. Unauthorized access detected in Oakwood Gates backup servers. While we'd been investigating her decoy office, Patricia had launched another attack on our home system. "It's a diversion," I realized, quickly establishing a remote connection to my security network. She wanted us focused here while she made her real move. Morrison was already on his phone, coordinating with units back in the neighborhood, but the situation at Oakwood Gates was unlike anything we'd seen before. Instead of trying to control or disable our security systems, Patricia was doing something far more insidious. "She's not attacking the system," I explained to Morrison as data streams scrolled across my screen. "She's replacing it, piece by piece. Every security protocol, every access code, she's overwriting them with her own versions." Back at Oakwood Gates, residents were starting to notice strange anomalies. Gate access cards that had worked perfectly for months suddenly required security updates. Home automation systems began displaying unfamiliar interfaces, security cameras activated without warning, their feeds redirecting to unknown servers. Linda Chen's voice crackled through my phone, tense with urgency. "Mark, something's happening at the community center. All the electronic locks just reset themselves, and the emergency exit doors won't open. There are people trapped inside." I pulled up the building's security feed, watching as confused residents gathered in the main hall. The digital displays that usually showed meeting schedules and community announcements were now cycling through a familiar message. "Upgrading to enhanced security protocols. Please stand by." "It's psychological warfare," Morrison observed, reading the growing panic in people's faces. "She's making them feel helpless in their own community." I nodded, fingers flying across my keyboard as I tried to counter Patricia's infiltration. She's proving a point that digital security is an illusion, that someone with enough knowledge can always take control. A new email appeared in my inbox, the sender address masked but the tone unmistakable. Missing your administrative access.
Yet,
Don't worry, I'll take good care of everyone. They just need to learn to trust the right authority. The message was followed by a video feed, live surveillance from inside the community center. Patricia had somehow accessed every camera simultaneously, creating a mosaic of confused and frightened faces. She's watching their reactions, I realized, studying how they respond to losing control. This isn't just about Oakwood Gates anymore. It's a test run for something bigger. Morrison's phone buzzed with updates from other jurisdictions. Similar incidents were being reported at gated communities across the state. Security systems suddenly locking down, residents trapped behind their own automated defenses. How is she doing this? Morrison demanded. We shut down her operations center. I studied the attack pattern, noticing something familiar in the code structure. She's using our own backup protocols against us. Remember those system specifications? She stole. She's not just copying our security measures. She's exploiting every potential vulnerability we ever planned for. The situation at the community center was deteriorating. The temperature control systems had activated, making the trapped residents increasingly uncomfortable. Emergency lights pulsed in irregular patterns, adding to the disorientation. Mark! Linda's voice was barely steady. People are starting to panic. Mrs. Foster is having chest pains, and we can't get medical personnel through the locked doors. I doubled my efforts to counter Patricia's infiltration, but every time I blocked one attack vector, 3 more appeared. She had thoroughly embedded herself in our systems, using our own security features as weapons. Then I noticed something odd in the network traffic, a pattern that shouldn't have been possible with our current infrastructure. Wait a minute, I muttered, tracing the signal path. These commands aren't just coming from outside the system. There's something else. A memory surfaced. The day Patricia's husband, Derek, had unknowingly carried that signal relay device during his morning jog. What if that wasn't the only hardware she had planted? Morrison, I said urgently, we need to check the community center's recent maintenance records. Who's had physical access to the building systems? The detective made some quick calls. While I continued analyzing the attack pattern, the answer came back quickly. A routine HVAC inspection 3 weeks ago, conducted by a contractor we'd never used before. Found it, I announced, isolating a suspicious signal signature. There's a hidden processing unit wired into the building's electrical system. Patricia didn't just hack our security. She installed her own hardware when we weren't looking. Morrison was already mobilizing a technical team, but we had more immediate problems. Mrs. Foster's condition was worsening, and the trapped residents were becoming increasingly distressed. I switched tactics, focusing on the building's emergency systems rather than trying to counter Patricia's entire attack. If I could just override the safety protocols. Linda, I called through the phone, get everyone away from the emergency. Exits. I'm going to try something. Patricia's infiltration was thorough, but she had made one critical assumption, that we would prioritize maintaining digital control over physical safety. Instead, I initiated a complete system shutdown, triggering the mechanical failsafes that would automatically unlock all doors in the event of a power loss. The lights in the community center went dark for a moment, then the emergency generators kicked in. But in that brief window, the electronic locks disengaged. Residents began flowing out of the building as paramedics rushed in to attend to Mrs. Foster. A slow clap emanated from my laptop speakers, followed by Patricia's voice. Very clever, Mr. Thompson, sacrificing control to protect the residents. But what happens when the next emergency isn't so easily solved? When people realize that their digital fortress can become a digital prison? I traced the audio signal, but it bounced between multiple relays, impossible to pinpoint. This won't work, Patricia. People understand the difference between security and control now. They won't fall for your manipulation. Her laugh was coldly amused. Won't they? Look how quickly they panicked when their precious technology turned against them. Deep down, they know they need someone to protect them, someone willing to make the hard choices. The only thing they need protection from is people like you, I shot back, still trying to locate her signal. People who use fear to justify controlling others. We'll see, Patricia replied smoothly. This was just a demonstration, a reminder of how vulnerable they really are. The real test begins now. The connection cut off as suddenly as it had begun. Around the neighborhood, systems began returning to normal. Gates responding to resident access codes, security cameras resuming their regular patterns. But something had changed. The trust in digital security, so carefully rebuilt after Patricia's first reign of control, had been shaken. As I helped the technical team remove her hidden hardware from the community center, I could hear residents questioning whether any system could truly keep them safe. Morrison reviewed the preliminary damage assessment, his expression grim. She didn't just attack our security. She attacked people's faith in the concept of digital protection itself. This is going to have ripple effects far beyond Oakwood Gates. He was right. Patricia had demonstrated that even the most sophisticated security measures could be turned against those they were meant to protect. The question now was, how many other communities were vulnerable to her particular brand of technological terrorism? As the day wore on, reports continued flowing in from other neighborhoods. Some had successfully resisted Patricia's attempted takeover, while others found themselves locked in digital power struggles with unknown administrators. Linda approached me as I was finishing my security analysis. Mark, the residents want to hold an emergency meeting. They're talking about going back to traditional locks and keys. I understood their fear, but I also knew that retreating to outdated security measures wouldn't solve the underlying problem. Patricia hadn't exposed a flaw in digital security itself. She had exposed our assumption that technology alone could protect us from human manipulation. The real solution would require something more fundamental. Rebuilding trust, not just in our security systems, but in our community's ability to resist those who would use fear to control us. As night fell over Oakwood Gates, I began drafting plans for a new kind of security framework, one that would combine digital protection with human oversight, transparency with accountability. Patricia had shown us our vulnerabilities, but in doing so, she had also shown us the path to genuine security. The question was, would other communities learn from our experience, or would they too have to learn the hard way that true safety comes not from control, but from trust? Surveillance feeds from a dozen gated communities flickered across my monitors as Detective Morrison and I tracked Patricia's expanding influence. Each screen showed similar scenes: gates locking down, security systems engaging, and residents discovering they were suddenly locked out of their own homes. "She's escalating," Morrison muttered, watching the pattern spread across our map, using Oakwood Gates as a blueprint to take over other communities. Through my headset, I could hear Linda Chen coordinating with neighborhood watch groups in affected areas. Our experience with Patricia had taught us the importance of human networks alongside digital ones. "Mark," Linda's voice carried a note of urgency. "We've got reports of automated systems activating in Riverside Meadows. Same pattern as before. Residents losing access, security protocols engaging without authorization." I pulled up the data. From Riverside Meadows, studying the intrusion pattern. Patricia had learned from her failures at Oakwood Gates, adapting her strategy to exploit not just technological vulnerabilities, but administrative ones as well. "Look at this," I said, highlighting a series of official-looking documents. "She's created a shell company, Advanced Community Protection Services, and somehow got it approved as a registered security provider for HOA communities. Everything she's doing appears completely legal on paper." Morrison's phone buzzed with updates from other jurisdictions. Similar incidents were being reported at gated communities across the state, security systems suddenly locking down, residents trapped behind their own automated defenses. A new alert flashed across my main screen, a live video feed showing Patricia addressing the board of yet another community. She wore a crisp business suit now, projecting corporate authority as she outlined her vision of integrated community protection. "Recent events have proven the vulnerability of fragmented security systems," she was saying, her voice carrying that familiar blend of concern and control. "Through advanced community protection services, we can provide the kind of comprehensive oversight that modern threats require." But something about her presentation seemed off. The confident smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and her gestures carried a hint of desperation. "She's rushing," I realized, noting the timestamps on recent incidents. "Taking over too many communities. Too quickly. Why?" Morrison studied the pattern on our map, like she's racing against something or someone. Before we could discuss further, my system detected an unauthorized access attempt. Not at any of the affected communities, but in the federal law enforcement database. "She's not just expanding," I said, tracing the intrusion. "She's covering her tracks, trying to erase any connection between Patricia Reynolds, disgraced HOA president, and the CEO of Advanced Community Protection Services." Linda's voice crackled through the comm. "Mark, you need to see this. Every community that signs up with her company is requiring residents to install new security monitoring devices in their homes. But these aren't just cameras or sensors. I accessed the technical specifications for these devices and felt my stomach drop. Patricia hadn't just created a security company, she was building a massive surveillance network, using people's fears about safety to plant her monitoring tools in thousands of homes. "Morrison," I said quietly, "how quickly can you get a federal warrant?" The detective was already on his phone, but we both knew bureaucracy moved slower than technology. While we waited for legal authorization, Patricia's network continued to grow. Through our surveillance, we watched her perfect her pitch to each new community. She had learned to adapt her message, playing on each neighborhood's specific fears and vulnerabilities. For wealthy areas, she emphasized protection of property values. In high-crime regions, she stressed personal safety. But the end result was always the same: complete control handed over to her company's advanced security systems. A notification popped up, another community falling under her influence. But this time, something was different. The residents weren't just accepting a system, they were actively requesting it. She's weaponizing our success against us, I realized, using Oakwood Gates as an example of why communities need centralized control. Every security measure we implemented to protect against her is being twisted into justification for her takeover. Morrison's phone finally buzzed with approval for the federal warrant. But as we prepared to move against Patricia's operation, my system detected a massive data transfer initiating across all affected communities. "She knows we're coming," I said, watching the pattern of data flow. "This isn't just a backup. She's creating redundancies, embedding her control protocols so deeply into these systems that removing them would cripple the community's entire infrastructure." Linda's voice carried alarm. "Mark, Something's happening with the home monitoring devices. They're not just recording anymore. They're activating some kind of secondary protocol. Through our feeds, we could see residents in Patricia's controlled communities suddenly losing access to basic home functions, heating, cooling, even water systems. Everything was being rerouted through her central network. "This is her endgame," I muttered. "Complete dependency. Make it impossible for these communities to function without her oversight." Morrison was coordinating with federal teams, but we all knew that any direct action would just hurt the trapped residents. Patricia had created a digital hostage situation on a massive scale. A message appeared on my screen, untraceable but unmistakably from Patricia. "You see now, true security requires absolute control. I'm not the villain here, Mark. I'm the inevitable future." I watched the chaos spreading across our monitors, communities falling like digital dominoes under her influence. But something about the pattern nagged at me, a vulnerability in her perfect system. "Linda," I called through the comm, "get me in touch with the resident groups we've been working with, all of them. It's time to show Patricia what real community security looks like." As night fell across the affected neighborhoods, a different kind of network began to emerge. Not digital, not controlled, but human. Residents sharing information, supporting each other, finding ways to resist the technological takeover of their homes. Patricia's system was powerful, but it relied on isolation and fear. When people started working together, sharing resources and knowledge, her control began to fracture. "Impossible," her message flashed across my screen. "They need structure. They need protection without central authority." "They have something stronger," I typed back. "Each other." Through our surveillance feeds, we watched as community after community began dismantling her monitoring devices, rebuilding their security systems from the ground up. Not with her corporate oversight, but with transparent, resident-controlled protocols. Patricia's perfect network of control was unraveling, destroyed not by federal intervention or technological countermeasures, but by the simple power of neighbors helping neighbors. As federal agents finally moved to shut down advanced community protection services, we discovered Patricia's final attempt at control, a deadman switch designed to erase all security data from affected communities. But even this last act of digital terrorism failed. The communities had already started rebuilding, creating systems based on trust rather than fear, protection rather than control. The sun rose on a changed landscape. Patricia's corporate empire was in ruins, her surveillance network dismantled by the very people she claimed to protect. But her legacy lived on in an unexpected way. Communities across the country began examining their own security systems, asking hard questions about the balance between safety and freedom. And in every neighborhood that had resisted her takeover, a new understanding emerged. True security cannot be imposed from above. It has to grow from within, nurtured by trust and strengthened by cooperation. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.